Good afternoon, Alessandra. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Good. Well, welcome to class. So today we're going to be talking about combining sentences. But before we start doing that, you've traveled a lot, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I have.
You've been to a lot of cool places. So when you were traveling, did you notice any differences, cultural contrasts, maybe from what is like where you grew up versus where you traveled?
hmm
And if you can't think of any, it's okay. Right off the top of your head.
Well, I know in Belgium they give one kiss on the cheek for greeting, and in the US we don't do any kisses.
That is true. We do not really give kisses in the US. Great, that's really awesome. And then a couple other examples I wrote down we could talk about. Our first one is in the US, we tip our servers, and in Japan, you don't have to tip. And another one could be in Belgium, you make eye contact when you cheers, but in America, in the US, you do not have to make eye contact. Most people don't. Cool. So, we can talk about comparison and contrasting sentences, and we can use different words to connect those two thoughts together. And so we're going to learn a couple of those today, okay? Cool. So the first one is conjunctions. And so conjunctions are really cool. The two we're going to be focusing on today is but versus yet and when to use those. The two words conjoin those conjunctions will combine two words or a group of words together. But is a little bit more informal. So when you're talking with your friends, and yet is a little bit more formal. And the difference is yet will typically predict something that hasn't happened yet, whereas but shows contrast that is unexpected in light of the first clause. So I'll give you an example. If I was going to use but in a sentence, I would say, I haven't been to Australia, but I think I'll really like it. But when I say yet, I'd say, I don't like long plane rides, yet I will get on a plane so I can continue to travel. And so how we see here, we have in the first one we're using but. We want to make sure that we put the comma before but. So in the first sentence, I haven't been to Australia, comma, but I think I will really like it. And that helps conjoin those two sentences together. And then in the second one, I don't like long plane rides, comma, yet I will get on a plane so that I can keep traveling. Can you think of a sentence using but?
Yeah, I am scared of heights, but I really want to go bungee jumping.
Perfect. And where would you put the comma?
Put the comma after heights, but before but.
Perfect. And then how about yet? Do you think you can make a sentence with yet?
Yeah, I don't like eggplant yet. I still eat it because it's healthy.
Good. I'm glad that you are eating healthy, even though you don't really like eggplant. That's great. That's awesome. Very good. All right. So those are conjunctions that we learned. The next group is subordinators. And the two we're going to be focusing on today is while versus even though. So while and even though are almost identical. The biggest difference is that even though is more emphatic, so showing surprise or being connected to people's emotions, and putting a strong emphasis on the contrast of the two clauses at hand. So just remember that's what you would use even though for. So two example sentences could be, if I was going to use while, I'd say, I prefer chocolate cake, comma, while my sister prefers key lime pie. You can see how we wrote that down right there, right? Cool. And then if I was to use even though, I would say, I still couldn't find the shirt I wanted, even though I went shopping for 2 hours. So that's how you would use those two. Can you think of a sentence using while?
Yeah, I like to discuss pop culture while my coworker likes to discuss philosophy.
Perfect. That was a great sentence. I love it. Can you use one using even though?
I haven't finished writing my cover letter, even though I've worked on it all day long.
Great. That's okay. Cover letters are hard, and you'll get a 10 soon.
Yeah.
And I'm happy you used even though in a great sentence. So thank you so much. Okay, now we're going to talk about prepositions. And prepositions, the two we're going to be focusing on, are instead versus despite. So instead means to substitute or replace, and it's a very informal way of talking. But despite means regardless, and it's very formal. So you'd use instead when you're talking with your friends or just anybody in casual conversation. But despite will be more formal, so when you're talking to maybe a teacher, you're writing a paper. And so 2 example sentences, if I was going to use instead, I could say, I chose to root for Belgium instead of France in the World Cup this year. But if I was to use despite, I could say, the ship sailed smoothly despite the terrible storm. So can you think of, and then we're going to talk about punctuation real quick. You don't really need to add a comma in there. Just because those 2, the preposition is going to be just connecting those 2 clauses into one clause, which is great. Can you think of a way of saying instead?
Yeah.
Or in a sentence, using instead in a sentence?
I chose to study marketing instead of environmental science.
That's a great sentence. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Can you use one a little bit more formal using despite?
I decided to work while being at school despite the heavy course load I had.
That's a great sentence too. You're awesome. You're doing so good. All right. And the last thing we're going to talk about is transitions. And the words we're going to be focusing on are however versus nevertheless. So we use these to show contrasts in a sentence. Nevertheless is more formal, much more formal. And we don't use it as often. But you'll use it again in academic writing or a formal conversation. And however is more informal. So it's going to be more likely to use it when you're just having casual conversation. And so some example sentences we have are, if I was to say, however, I'm a vegetarian. However, sometimes I eat fish. So I'm a vegetarian is a complete sentence, so you put a period. Then you could say, however, comma, and continue your thought. So again, I am a vegetarian. However, sometimes I eat fish. And then if we were to use nevertheless, say, Alessandra said her German is terrible. Nevertheless, she got 90% on her written exam in German. And so that feels a little bit more formal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. But the one we're saying, however, it feels like pretty casual, right? Cool. Could you use a sentence can you give me an example sentence using however as a transition word?
I was supposed to write my cover letter today. However, I watched TV instead.
Good for you. TV's great. Could you think of one using nevertheless?
I'm behind in writing my cover letter. Nevertheless, I will prevail.
Good for you. That's another great sentence. She's doing great. Doing great. Okay, so we talked about transitions, however and nevertheless, prepositions, instead versus despite, subordinators, while versus even though, and conjunctions, but versus yet. So, if I was to read you the sentence again from our cultural contrast from earlier, in the US we tip our servers, in Japan you don't tip. Could you combine those 2 sentences into one sentence using one of the things you learned today?
In the US, we tip our servers. However, in Japan, we do not tip.
Perfect. That was great. And then how about in Belgium, you make eye contact when you cheers. In America, you don't. Could you combine those 2 using one of those?
In Belgium, you make eye contact when you cheers, but in America, you don't.
Great. And in this example, you used a conjunction, right?
Yes.
And in the first example, you used a transition.
Yes.
Great job. You did excellent work today. Super proud of you, and thank you for being here.